Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. Tonight we do have a great one for you. Scott Ritter is joining us. Now you probably have heard of Scott or seen him either on this show or others. He was a United Nations weapons inspector in Iraq from 1991 to 1998. He was chief inspector in 14 of the more than 30 inspection missions in which he participated. He became a major voice of opposition in the run-up to and during the 2003 invasion of Iraq, being one of the few analysts who said there were no weapons of mass destruction, and he was right. Now, because of his insight and expertise, he's become a well-known analyst of U.S. wars and U.S. proxy wars, especially the recent Russian invasion of Ukraine. Really looking forward to this conversation tonight, so let's get to it. Scott Ritter, welcome to the show. It's great to see you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, people are very familiar with your analysis of the current world events that are going on, the current conflicts, the U.S. proxy wars, the U.S.-backed wars. But I want to get to, and people know that you were a UN weapons inspector and that you said there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that the whole thing was a farce and to get us into that war. So I think people are pretty familiar with that. But I want to get into how you even became a UN weapons inspector. Like, what was your background? Did you join the military right out of high school? Where did you grow up? Let's start there. Where did you grow up?
Well, my father was a career Air Force officer. He spent 26 years in the Air Force, a commissioned officer. My mom was a nurse, a commissioned officer also. She had a very serious injury early on, and she was medically retired. But she continued to be a nurse her entire life. Everywhere we moved, she got a job. She specialized in newborns,
Wow.
pediatric, the premature babies. That was her specialty. But we were raised all over. Every 2 years, we packed up and moved to a new location. This was during the Cold War, so my father spent a lot of time overseas in various hot spots. He was in Turkey right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when they got rid of the Jupiter missiles and replaced that nuclear capability with F-100 Super Sabres that were on strip alert with a nuclear weapon strapped underneath them. He deployed as a maintenance officer with that squadron. He did a couple tours in Vietnam with the 10th Air Commando Scotia Tigers, introducing the F-5s to the Vietnamese Air Force. He did a tour in Korea after the Pueblo incident when they sent F-106 Delta Darts to Korea to beef up our military presence there. In the 1970s, we moved to Hawaii, and he was involved with the Pacific Air Forces there. He spent a lot of time in Vietnam doing the Vietnamization program. We hosted a Vietnamese refugee family after the fall of Saigon. It was interesting times. And then from Hawaii, we got sent back to Turkey. I went to high school in Hawaii, ninth grade. I went to high school in Turkey, 9th, 10th, and half of 11th grade. Turkey was phenomenal. I can't describe what it was like growing up in Turkey in the 1970s. You had terrorist bombings. You had guys shooting at your school bus. It was just a grand adventure for us. Terrible for my parents, but to be a teenage kid in that environment was plus it was Turkey's just a wonderful place to live. The culture, the language. I learned how to speak Turkish. I was in the Boy Scouts. We spent a lot of time exploring Turkey. Then we moved to Germany. I graduated from high school in Germany, West Germany at the time. When I say Cold War, this was real. I don't know if people understand how real it was. We had 300,000 American soldiers in West Germany ready to go to war at the drop of a dime. That meant they were in the field training all the time. When we arrived there in November of 1977, they were doing the autumn version of winter of Reforger, which is the annual exercise to train how to fly all the troops to Germany, fall in on pre-positioned equipment, and be ready to fight the Soviet army. Where we were was actually one of the lines of defense that the 8th Infantry Division would fall in on, assuming the Russians had broken through. So the farmers' fields were filled with tanks, helicopters flying over. As you're driving to school, you'll have 40 F-104s flying over your head. It was real. My dad was with the 17th Air Force. I'll show you how real it was. We lived next to a place called North Point. North Point was a nuclear weapons storage facility. On occasion, my dad would get called down to the bunker. The bunker is where you go when there's going to be a nuclear war. It's not training, it's real. It's real life. This was back in the day when we were ready to go to nuclear war that quick.
Yeah.
And my mom and dad had a code word that they would say. It meant that gather the kids, hug them. It's going to end. It could the potential for the world to end, and it was the last Babylon. Twice while we were stationed in Germany, my dad called my mom and said, "A last Babylon," because he was in the bunker. There was a chance the Soviets were coming across the border, and nuclear weapons were going to go, and we were going to die. And he was just basically saying, "I love you. Goodbye." That was my reality. Every morning when I went to school, I didn't know if there was going to be a home when I came home. Seriously. Because we lived right next door to the nuclear weapons storage facility that everybody knew was going to be the first place the Soviets hit. So I was imbued with a hyper sense of patriotism. Hyper sense of patriotism. I viewed the Soviets as a living manifestation of evil. And when I graduated high school, I wanted to join the Army so that I could be assigned to the Fulda Gap, so I could be the first guy there when the Soviets came across, and I would be the first guy to kill a commie for mommy. Sounds funny today. It was as real as it gets back then. Better dead than red. And so I joined the Army, and I got to basic training, and they decided that I was officer material, so they sent me to West Point Prep School to get my commission in West Point. I successfully completed that year at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, but decided that the Army wasn't for me. Not because I was against the military, but this was 1979, 1980. Drugs were rampant. Racism was a big problem. And frankly, the Army that existed then, I didn't want to go to war with. They weren't warriors. They were anything but, in my opinion. On the base of Fort Monmouth was a Marine Corps Communications Detachment. And I remember watching the Marines walking across the base, and these were square-to-wear guys. They were proud of the uniform they wore. They respected one another. Their salutes were smart, snappy. And I said, that's the team I want to play for. And so I turned down my appointment to West Point, which shocked everybody because I had the appointment. And they told me, well, if you turn it down, you have to spend 6 years as an enlisted man. I said, okay. I mean, that's the price I'm going to pay, but I'm not going to West Point unless you allow me to be commissioned in the Marine Corps. They said, no. That West Point does Army. And so I went out and signed up for airborne training, Ranger training, Special Forces track. And the colonel called me and said, what are you doing? I said, you told me I have to spend 6 years in the Army. He said, I thought you'd come back and ask to go to West Point. I said, no, I told you I'm not going to West Point because I don't want to be a commissioned officer in this Army. And he said, so you're serious about going to the Marine Corps? I said, yep. They released me, honorable discharge. I went to college, got my commission in the Marine Corps. Again, the goal was to be with the team that was going to go to war against the Soviet Union and win, and that was the Marine team. When I was in college, every summer I went to officer candidate school. You're only supposed to go twice, but I went the first summer and got halfway through, and then I was not physically qualified because of a hernia they detected. So they sent me home, which was horrible because anybody who's ever gotten off the bus at Camp Upshur in the summertime in Quantico, Virginia, and you get attacked, the shark attack by the drill instructors, you don't want to do that again. And I knew exactly what was going to happen. It just terrified me, but I finished it 6 weeks, did the next 6 weeks. I studied Russian history because I wanted to know my enemy. I took the Russian language because I needed to speak the language of my enemy. I read Russian literature because I wanted to know how my enemy thinks. My whole focus was to become an expert on the Russians, on the Soviet Union, so that when I joined the Marine Corps, when I get into the Fleet Marine Force, I could better prepare my Marines for combat with the Soviets. And for 2.5 years in 29 Palms, California, assigned to 5th Battalion, 11th Marines, a nuclear-capable field artillery unit, I did just that. We perfected the art of providing nuclear and non-nuclear fire support for Marine maneuver units ready to engage the Soviets in a variety of contingency operations ranging from the Middle East to Europe.
When you look at today versus then, today we see a lot of, I think, war posturing amongst our political class, our political elites, the Department of Defense. You've got Nikki Haley's out there saying she wants a Department of Offense. So we're seeing a lot of this like real rhetoric and posturing, and a lot of it we now know is just that. It's not real. It's not a real threat. It's a perceived threat. It's just to keep the military-industrial complex going. When you look back then, when the Cold War was raging, how real was that threat? Was that a more real time that then feeds the fear and the thinking of today, where the threat may or may not be really that real? I mean, kind of Or was it just much of the same? It was just posturing just to continue the military industrial complex, and we were all duped back then, just as duped as we are today.
Well, the first thing I want to point out is in the 1980s, we were largely a peacetime military. Our senior NCOs, our senior Army, our officers were veterans of the Vietnam War. But nobody had fought a large scale ground combat in Europe. We didn't have any more World War II veterans. So we were all sort of dealing with theoreticals. We trained hard, though. What we knew is that it wasn't going to be easy. We spent, my unit, we would spend more than 200 days a year in the field doing live fire, maneuvering, gone all the time. We fired more rounds in a month than a Marine division fires in a year today in training. That's how diminished the training has become today. We went out there and trained as we were going to fight. We put rounds down range. We moved. We shoot, shoot, move, communicate. We did it under realistic conditions. My job was to make training as realistic as possible. One of the things I did was I got a radar, a counter battery radar, and I set it up. And basically, I said, when you fire your round, you have to be displaced in 2 minutes or you're dead. So they'd fire around, and normally under the way they operate before, they just sit there and boom, 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 fire rounds. And I'm like, you think the Soviets are going to just let you do this? They have their own counter battery. The second you send a round down range, they're coming in you with dedicated counter battery fire. You're going to die. Move to a predetermined location, sit up and be ready to take the next fire mission. And so they'd fire, my radar would get it. When they got a lock on, we'd start the clock. And if they were still there at the clock, they're dead. And I had a battalion commander who took this seriously. So he put the fear of God into those battery commanders that being dead wasn't good for their career, that he'd let them learn once, but if they continued to do it, he'd fire them, and he did. We also, I created called a opposing forces team with scouts from the armor battalion, from scout snipers, and I created a Spetsnaz unit, a Russian Spetsnaz unit. And we'd be helicoptered in behind the lines, like the Rat Patrol with our Jeeps. And we'd come off the Jeeps at night vision goggles. And our job was to find the nuclear capable batteries and eliminate them, just like the Soviets would in combat. So These guys are setting up, doing their whole peacetime thing of how we receive a nuclear weapon, all that. And I'm coming in and I kill them all. And I say, you're dead. You're dead. Where was your security? Well, we have to do, no. No ifs, ands, or buts. This is war. Be ready to fight. And we spent 2.5 years doing that. And I was so ready to kill Russians, it wasn't even funny. Today, I don't think they train to that level. Of course, we have a lot of people today who have done serious combat time in Iraq and Afghanistan in low-intensity conflict. But if you take a look at what they did there and compare to what's happening in Ukraine today, you know that there's no comparison between, the scope and scale of the violence that was being done during the global war on terror and what's going on in Ukraine today. So I don't think our military, I don't think Nikki Haley knows anything about what she's talking about. And frankly speaking, the vast majority of the general officers who are in the military today, who spent their entire career kicking down doors in Afghanistan, or kicking down doors in Iraq, terrorizing villagers, dropping bombs on Afghan wedding parties, they have no clue when it comes to large-scale ground combat. But I wrapped up that tour, and I had actually, when you're a lieutenant, they say, where do you want to go? And all you want to do as a lieutenant is go to the Fleet Marine Force, because that's the tip of the spear. If they go to war, you need to be on the ship, ready to rock, or on the ground, ready to get flown in. So I put in for a special operations capable Marine Expeditionary Unit. I think it was the 11th. And I got the job as the assistant S2. So that's really cool. The intelligence officer, I'm going to command the reconnaissance units and all this kind of stuff. And suddenly my orders were changed, you see, because in December of 1987, Ronald Reagan sat down with Mikhail Gorbachev and they signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. That was a treaty to get rid of an entire category of nuclear weapons. And a Department of Defense activity was created called the On-Site Inspection Agency. And they were tasked to bring together the best Russian area experts in the military and train them up as inspectors, because no one had ever done this before. Train them up to go and implement this treaty. And the Marine Corps was tasked with providing, I think, 3 or 4 Russian-speaking officers of the rank of colonel, lieutenant colonel, and major. I was a newly promoted first lieutenant at the time. And they go through their lists, and apparently They got to 3 and they ran out. They didn't have anybody. And so they went down the list. We got any captains? No, we don't got any captains. We got any first lieutenants? We got this one guy, Ritter, out in 29 Palms, California, but he just got orders to 11th Mew. Nope, cancel the orders. Off he goes. And they shipped me off to Washington, D.C. And I was one of the first people to arrive in the agency, the on-site inspections agency. I was fired on my first day there, or second day there. I was fired because these 2 Army lieutenant colonels came up and said, what do you do here? I had been sent to be an intelligence analyst for the agency, but then the general said, we're not going to do intelligence. We're not here to spy. We're here to implement an arms control treaty. So I don't want anything to do with intelligence here. So I'm unemployed. And they said, well, what are you doing? I said, I don't know. They said, you want to come to Russia as an inspector? I said, yeah. And then they said, okay, you're on our team. And I went down the hallway and a Marine lieutenant colonel came out. His name was Kelly. Lieutenant Colonel Kelly, called him Pulemyot Kelly, Machine Gun Kelly, because he spoke Russian so fast. And he hit me up with Russian. Now, I took Russian in college. I admit that, 2 years. I played football at the same time, and I drank a lot of beer at the same time. And I think you can imagine that my Russian language skills are very minimal. And so he's hit me at full speed with Russian. I'm like stumbling in basic college Russian. Please, sir, could you please repeat yourself slowly? I don't understand. He said, you don't speak Russian worth a damn, do you? I said, never claimed to. He said, you're fired. You're a disgrace to the Marine Corps. I can't believe the Marine Corps sent you here. You're an embarrassment. You'll never step foot in Russia. Get out of here. And I went back to Lieutenant Colonels and I said, Lieutenant Colonel Kelly fired me. He said, well, he's the quality control guy. So yeah, you're sort of screwed. And so I was on my way out, but long story short, leadership abhors a vacuum. This was a new agency and there were a lot of problems. And I was an unemployed first lieutenant Marine. And when a problem stopped, I looked around and nobody's doing it. I solved the problem. And I sort of became this guy that was solving problems. And I was put in charge of counterintelligence. First lieutenant in charge of a national level counterintelligence program. Insane. And that got me in a lot of trouble with the general because I was doing things that I thought should be done that shouldn't have been done. Not because I was wrong, but because he just didn't want that stuff. An Army colonel who wanted me fired because of what I did counterintelligence wise, I basically signed everybody up for a polygraph program that nobody wanted to do. When they said, okay, well, we have to cancel the program, but Ritter did get you 3 additional bodies. This was a time when bodies are a premium. They didn't have enough inspectors, and because of my counterintelligence program, I built 3 additional bodies. They said, if we do away the program totally, we lose the bodies. And he said, okay, we'll keep them. But Ritter, you're going to work for me because I want to keep my eyes on you to make sure you never do anything like this again. So I did. He was responsible for setting up a monitoring facility outside of a Soviet missile factory in Votkhinsk, Russia. They built the SS-20s. That were banned by the treaty, but they also built the SS-25, which was permitted. Our job was to make sure that the SS-25s weren't SS-20s. I became the first inspector on the ground in the Soviet Union. When the treaty started, I was the first inspector on the ground in the Soviet Union. And when I finished that job 2 years later, I had 2 classified commendations from the director of the CIA, because even though we don't do intelligence, you don't unleash a Marine intelligence officer into the middle of the Soviet Union during the Cold War and expect them to stay deaf, dumb, and blind.
Right.
So I did my job. We didn't violate the treaty at all. We implemented it in good faith. I learned an awful lot about missiles that I knew nothing about because I was a Marine. And the other thing that happened, though, is that I had this amazing transformation in my life because I had been just frothing at the bit to kill these people, to kill them. And I don't think people understand, unless you're in the military, what you mean by that. I mean, that was my life, was preparing to go to war against these people. And suddenly I'm there living amongst them. And I had an amazing transformation where I suddenly realized that I didn't want to kill these people anymore, that they're good people, that they have a job to do, but they have families. They don't hate us. They want to live in peace just like we do, and that maybe getting rid of nuclear weapons was a much better way to spend my time than learning how to kill these people. So it was an amazing transformation, but like everything, that job too shall end. And it ended. I went back to the Marine Corps. I was scheduled to do some interesting work, but I had to complete amphibious warfare school, which is the captain levels course. In the middle of that, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, and I get pulled from the amphibious warfare school because one of my jobs when I was in 29 Palms was to be the Iraq War analyst for the 7th Marine Amphibious Brigade. So I knew a lot about Iraqi defensive combat. And I got pulled into a special cell created by the Commandant of the Marine Corps to plan amphibious warfare operations. And I designed a corps level amphibious operation that got briefed to the Commandant of the Marine Corps. General Schwarzkopf, who was the commander of U.S. forces in the Middle East, rejected the plan, but the Marines liked me, and I ended up getting sent to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I was assigned to General Schwarzkopf's staff, and they sent me down to battle damage assessment, which is just boring work, sitting down there looking at photographs, determining whether or not you achieve the kill criteria. And like on day 3, the Iraqis started firing Scud missiles against Israel and against Saudi Arabia. And General Waller, who was Schwarzkopf's deputy, comes storming into the battle damage and says, "Who's a missile expert here?" And everybody turned to me and said, "He's an inspector." And he said, "Come with me." And he took me off and we did some crazy stuff. But that got me involved in the counter Scud battle in a very serious way. I worked with the U.S. Air Force. I worked with British Special Forces, American Special Forces, Navy SEALs, Delta Force, the Air Force, trying to interdict these Scud launches. It was a very interesting war for me because I got to see everything up close and personal. I was personally involved in many of the decisions. At one point, the General Schwarzkopf and General Glosson was commander of the air component, or Horner was, but Glosson ran the black hole they called the targeting. And we had received a videotape from an F-15 squadron, F-15E squadron, and they claimed had killed some Scuds. And I've been viewing this. Look, on day 6, I think, of the war, we had claimed to kill 64 Scuds, or 64 Scud launchers. Iraq only had 19 launchers in their inventory. And I'm saying, we got a problem here, guys. We're killing things that ain't Scud launchers. And so I looked at the videotape and I looked at everything. I said, no, those are Jordanian fuel tankers. And I wrote a report that said that and sent it up. But Schwarzkopf was under pressure to keep Israel out of the war. Israel was tired of getting hit by missiles. And so Israel was saying, if you can't stop the missiles, we're coming in. But if Israel came in, the coalition breaks up, war's over, we lost. And so we have to keep them in. So now he has a videotape that he can say, I killed 6 Scuds. So he went on national TV and briefed it, he and Glosson. And I'm sitting there going, what the heck are they doing? They can't brief it. I'm the battle damage assessment officer. And I said, those aren't Scuds. But he's 4-star general. He said they were. So the next morning, I have to do the report that gives the number, total number of Scud kills, confirmed kills. And I put down 0. And it got kicked back and they said, no, it's 6. I said, no, it's not. They said, yeah, the general briefed it last night. I said, that's not how this works. I'm the battle damage assessment officer. It's my name on the report. I looked at the intelligence and I'm telling you, it's 0. And they said, no, you got to change it. The commander in chief said it's 6. I said, no, I got fired on the spot. You're fired. You're out of here. But before I went out, I took up my report and I gave it to a senior Defense Intelligence Agency official who sent it over to Washington, D.C. And it ended up being briefed to Colin Powell, of all people, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Powell's looking at it going, well, we got a problem here. So, so he called up Schwarzkopf. He said, hey, somebody on your staff is saying that you didn't kill Scuds. Who? And he goes, he doesn't know anything. He's not as good as the others. He sucks. He's the worst. We have really good guys. He's awful. He's a Marine. He didn't say that, but I'm sure he implied it. But the point is, Powell said, you might want to recheck it. So they did. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., they did digital enhancement of it. It's exactly what I said it was. They were Scud. They were fuel tankers, Jordanian civilian fuel tankers. Schwarzkopf rehired me, so I got my job back. But they wouldn't let me change the report. I said, okay, but my name didn't go on that report, so I don't care, but I'll never falsify a report like that. I got fired again. I got arrested later on in the war because I got involved with Delta Force, and we were planning an operation into Western Iraq to seize a Scud decoy. I found an actual Scud decoy, and I wanted to bring it back, ship it off. We're going to take it apart, do a radar cross-section so that we could get radar signature to bring missiles in and kill it. I was focused on that. I was accused of trying to start my own war, and I was placed under arrest by General Schwarzkopf and sent back to Riyadh. And fortunately, they ripped up the papers. But so I had an interesting war. I was fired once by Schwarzkopf, arrested once by Schwarzkopf, but everything I said about Scuds turned out to be right. And so when the war ended and I went back to the Marine Corps, they were trying to keep me in. General Gray wanted me in. I got a good fitness report out of the war. But I was a cold warrior. I wanted to kill Russians, and I no longer wanted to kill Russians. The job that I wanted to do, all the jobs I wanted to do in the Marine Corps, were related to spying on Russia, and there was none of that taking place. And so I decided to get out of the Marine Corps, and I resigned my commission, and I was released from active duty in June of 1991, and thought I was going to go off and have a nice civilian life. But in August of 1991, I get a phone call from that colonel. Remember the colonel that hated me, but gave me the opportunity to go to Vodkinsk? He's now the chief of staff of the United Nations Special Commission, who's trying to track down Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. And he calls up and he says, hey, you want to come over and help us out? The Iraqis are lying to us. So they aren't telling us the truth. And we need you to create an intelligence unit in UNSCOM so that we can find the truth. And he had recommended me because I was a veteran arms control inspector. There weren't too many of us around at the time. I was an intelligence officer with a good track record. Like I said, 2 classified commendations from the director of the CIA and a good war record. And I knew Iraqi Scud missiles. And one of the biggest problems they had right now was accounting for Iraqi Scud missiles. So I accepted that job. I went to the United Nations, and that turned into a 7-year experience, a 7-year experience. It was only supposed to be a 6-month job. Nobody ever thought it would last that long. 7 years. When I got there, Iraq was armed to the teeth with weapons of mass destruction. They had chemical weapons, biological weapons. They had a nuclear weapons program. They had a long-range ballistic missile program, and they were lying to us about it. By the time I finished, we had accounted for virtually every aspect of this. All their weapons had either been destroyed, dismantled, or rendered harmless, and there was no viable Iraqi weapons of mass destruction threat. But the problem is, we couldn't prove 100%. Just to give you a quick rundown of how difficult this was, when I first got there, they asked me to do a report. How many missiles do you think Iraq's holding on to? I looked at the intelligence and I wrote a report, and I said, they're holding on to about 100 missiles. Everybody went, no, how do you know that? I said, I'm pretty good at my job. And they're holding on to about 100 missiles, about 6 launchers. In March of 1992, Iraq finally came clean under pressure from the inspectors. They had 98 missiles. Damn, I was off by 2. I'm not that good. 98 missiles and 6 launchers. But they couldn't just give us the missiles. No. See, the Iraqis blew them all up and buried them underground. So now we had to go in and actually, like forensic scientists, dig the remnants of the missiles up and then segregate them into their component parts, get the serial numbers, match them up to production records coming from, guess where? Vodkinsk, the place where I had worked. They also built the Scud missile. And we had to put it all together. By the time we were done, I could account for 96 of 98 missiles. That's pretty good work. But there were 2 missiles unaccounted for. And so the U.S. said, well, you didn't get 100%. In 1993, I briefed the director of the CIA, James Woolsey, and his staff. You might know some of the names. Martin Indyk used to be a senior guy there. He was an ambassador to Israel. Bruce Rydell, another big name. These are the big names in the American intelligence community. I briefed them that we had accounted for all of Iraq's missiles. They thanked me, and when they finished, they said, we don't accept those numbers. The CIA number will be 12 to 20 missiles, and that number will never change no matter what you do, which meant the CIA didn't care about the truth. They only wanted to maintain the fiction that Iraq was holding on to weapons of mass destruction so they could continue economic sanctions to weaken Saddam Hussein until they can release them. We'll say this about Israel. In 1994, I went to Israel for the first time, and I met with the head of Israeli military intelligence, and when I was proposing some sensitive intelligence cooperation. But he had an emergency. See, Saddam Hussein was moving troops like he was going to go back into Kuwait. If everybody go back and Google what was happening in the fall of 1994, you'll see everybody was worried about war. And in Israel, they were deploying the Patriot missiles. And the question was, do we deploy gas masks to the civilian population? You see, when they deployed gas masks during the Gulf War, people put them on wrong. One of the great tragedies of this war is when an Iraqi Scud missile comes in, the alarm goes off, they go into their safe room, and the mother has a newborn infant who's crying, and she tries to put the gas mask on the infant, but she does it wrong. But they have to stay in the room, and the baby suffocates and dies. Or the grandparent puts it on, hyperventilates, has a heart attack and died. More Israelis died from the consequences of putting on gas masks and panicking than they died from Scud. So that was a big problem. So he said, look, we have to decide, are we going to reissue these gas masks? He said, you're the expert. Does Iraq have any Scud missiles left? Now, that's a huge burden to put on me.
Yeah.
But I gave him the honest answer, and I said, no, they don't. He went and briefed the prime minister at the time, Yitzhak Rabin. And he said, according to Scott Ritter, UN Scud missile expert, they don't have any Scud missiles. And he said, then we're not issuing gas masks. So you see the difference between the CIA and Israeli intelligence? Back then, Israeli intelligence actually cared about the truth. The CIA has never cared about the truth.
Yeah.
But that was how I became an inspector. I resigned in 1998 because I felt the United States was using the inspections to gather intelligence for the purposes of overthrowing Saddam Hussein. That wasn't the purpose of the United Nations. Our job, our mandate was disarmament, and I wasn't being allowed to do disarmament work anymore. So I resigned and I started speaking out against U.S. policy ever since.
Part of that inability to do the disarmament was Iraq, wasn't it? Were they blocking you from actually doing the inspections?
Oh, yes, they were. But you have to ask yourself why they were blocking us from doing the inspections.
Well, why were they?
Well, let me give you an example why they were. In the summer of 1996, I was getting ready to do. We were concerned that the Iraqis were hiding material from us, and that the people hiding it were associated with Saddam Hussein's personal guard, the Special Republican Guard, the Special Security Organization, the Murafakin, who were his closest bodyguards. We knew that they had been involved in 1991 moving this stuff around. And even though the Iraqis claimed to have told us the truth about the ultimate disposition of the weapons, they never admitted that Saddam's personal bodyguards were involved in moving this stuff around. So my position was, you had a concealment mechanism that was used to conceal weapons from us. You claim there are no more weapons, but you're lying to us about the concealment mechanism. So I have to assume that that concealment mechanism still exists and is hiding weapons until you answer all my questions. But they wouldn't answer the questions because it's the Presidential Guard. And the CIA was using my inspections into finding out what this Presidential Guard was doing. They weren't using it to find out if they were still hiding weapons. They were using it so they could kill Saddam Hussein. And in June of 1996, I took an inspection team in. We were surrounding the Special Republican Guard facilities in the Saddam International Airport, thinking we were going to trap some stuff in there. And it was a very controversial inspection. I had a lot of CIA guys on my team who were supposed to be logistics experts. They were paramilitary operatives who were actually coordinating with a cell of Special Republican officers. Their job was to use my inspection to create a crisis so that cruise missiles could be launched against Iraq, and then they would coordinate with the 3rd Special Forces Battalion of the Special Republican Guard to assassinate Saddam Hussein and take over. It didn't work because Saddam's intelligence was pretty good. They infiltrated the CIA early on, and while we were there on the ground, and I didn't know any of this was going on. I thought I'm leading an inspection. I didn't realize that the CIA was planning this coup. But while this was happening, the Iraqis called up the CIA station chief in Amman using the satellite phone that they had sent in with their operatives and said, yeah, we got all your boys. They're all dead. Have a good day. And that was the end of the coup. So now the CIA gets pulled out. I come back because the Iraqis stopped us. There was a big controversy. Went to the Security Council, war, the whole thing. I came back to do the follow-on inspection. The Iraqis came up and they said, when you came here, you told us that we could trust you. You told us you were an intelligence officer. You told us that you fought in the war, but you said that you would never lie to us, that we can trust you. They said, we can never trust you again. I said, what? What did I do? How did I lie to you? They said, you were part of of assassination effort against the president. I said, I was no such thing. And then they started to tell me what was going on. And I realized that my inspection team had been used by the United States as a front for assassinating Saddam Hussein. It wasn't the only time. In March 1998, they used my inspection team to try and start a war with Iraq, the inspection of the Ministry of Defense building. This was briefed at the White House, planned by the White House. I was picked to lead this mission because they believed that the Iraqis would never allow us in. What they don't realize is my job is never to start a war, at least not as a UN weapons inspector. My job was to do an inspection. And I got on the ground and I convinced the Iraqis at the highest levels, this one all the way up to the big man, that if they don't let us in, there's going to be a war. And if they let us in, they can trust me to do my job. If you have material related to my work, I will find it. They knew how good I was. But if you don't, we're not here to cause problems. We'll inspect. And if you tell me there's nothing in there and I confirm there's nothing there, we're out of here. They let us in and we stopped a war. That's one of the reasons why the United States government decided to start shutting me down after that inspection, because they said that Ritter's not playing ball the way we want him to play ball. Well, my job wasn't to do that. My job was to be a weapons inspector and be a weapons inspector with integrity. That doesn't mean I'm incapable of playing the wink, wink, nod, nod game. I just told you I had 2 classified commendations from the director of the CIA, but I'm a man of honor. When I shake your hand, when we have a contract, that's the contract that I will that I will die for. And when I joined the United Nations, I confronted the U.S. government and said, is there a hidden agenda? And they said, your job is to fulfill the mandate set forth by the Security Council under Resolution 687. That was my job, told to me by the U.S. government. And the CIA can't come in afterwards and renegotiate that because I don't work for the CIA. I never did work for the CIA.
Why didn't the Iraqis kill you on the spot? I mean, if they thought that you were a part of a plot to assassinate Saddam Hussein and they killed the others, why wouldn't they have killed you?
I'm an American citizen, but they tried several times to kill me. In the summer of 1997, again, I had a confrontation with Uday Hussein, Saddam Hussein's elder son. He was running around in his Porsche 928 outside of a facility we were inspecting, and the Iraqis were scared to death of him. I stood in front of his car to make him come to a stop, and then when his window came down, I shouted at him, told him in certain Marine Corps language with lots of colorful words to get the heck out of my area of operations. And he sped off and got drunk and ordered the Murafakin, his personal bodyguards, to assassinate me that night. And they sent a 2-man assassination team to the site, but they were drunk. And as they came out of their car, they pulled out their pistol and shot themselves in the leg. And so now they're screaming on the ground, bleeding. They get thrown in, they get driven off. The next day, a whole new security team comes in, and they're there to protect me from Uday. And I was actually, I had in my inspection paperwork, we had a signed warrant to inspect Uday's residence. So I said, screw it. Uday, want to play ball? Let's go. And I'm driving my team down there. My team's going, Scott, do you really want to do this? Is this the smartest thing in the world to do? And I'm like, Uday tried to kill me. I'm going to go after him. And as we're going, the Iraqis, one by one, are peeling off. And finally, the last general stops and he says, we know where you're going. We can't go with you. And if you go there, you will die. And he said, we don't want you to die. There's no reason to go there. There's nothing there. I promise you. Only death awaits you. And that I looked at my other inspectors, and that's when the light went off and said, this ain't worth dying for. And I turned around and I went back to the facility. But they tried to gun me down outside of the intelligence headquarters building on 2 separate occasions. As I arrived at a site, the Special Republican guards put loaded guns to my head, threatened to shoot me. I confronted one at outside of our airplane. They pulled out a pistol to threaten to shoot me, put it up against my head. I shouted at him, pull the trigger, do it. Don't threaten me, do it. He didn't do it. Why? Because you don't kill an American like that, because it'll be war. That's what they realized. And the other thing is, they knew I never lied to them. They knew I never. Why do you think I was allowed back into Iraq after I resigned to make a movie about the history of weapons inspections? Why would they let me do that? Why did they let me testify or go before the Iraqi parliament in September of 2002? The only non-Iraqi to speak before the Iraqi parliament ever at that time, to appeal to the Iraqi government to let weapons inspectors back in without preconditions is the only way to stop a war. They let me do that. Saddam Hussein agreed and allowed inspectors back in. Why would they do that? Because they knew I never lied to them. They knew I was a mean, tough son of a gun. They knew that I was a hard-nosed inspector, and they knew that I wouldn't compromise. But they knew that when I told them something, straight up told them something, that it was the truth. Nothing but the truth, so help me God.
So clearly, the government doesn't, or the military-industrial complex, whatever, or the deep state, or whatever you want to, however you want to call them, but they clearly don't care about the truth. They have an agenda. They set their minds on an agenda and only want information, or even will make up information in order to get that agenda implemented.
Look, I just told you the story how the director of the CIA, James Woolsey, you're still alive, dude. I hope you're watching this. You're a lying sack of manure. I just exposed you on national TV. You're the one who said there's 12 to 20 and that number will never change no matter what I do. How'd you come up with that number, Jimmy? Why'd you come up with that number, Jimmy? You're an intelligence officer. You're supposed to be briefing the commander-in-chief about the truth, Jimmy. Oh, you're telling me that there's a political agenda, that the CIA does have politicized intelligence, and they do. The entire WMD fiasco was one concocted lie because they knew the truth. How did they know the truth? Because for 7 years, myself and other inspectors were in Iraq doing very, very dangerous work. I just told you how many times, bad things almost happened. There were even more than that. Very dangerous work under very difficult circumstances. And we found the truth. We found the truth. It wasn't just bumbling around doing it. In 1995, in November of 1995, based on Israeli intelligence, I went to Jordan, met with the king of Jordan and his senior intelligence officer about intelligence that a Palestinian middleman had brought in missile components from Russia and were getting ready to ship them on to Iraq. Mm-hmm. They were going the next morning. I had to convince the king to launch a raid that night. He did. They found the gyroscopes. That's how good we were. That's how good we were. We were really good at our job. And we could ascertain that between 95 and 97% of Iraq's totality of its weapons of mass destruction had been identified and destroyed by the end of our job. The unaccounted for stuff, like I told you, they blew it up forensically. Bones disappear. Bombs get scattered. You can't account for everything. But we were monitoring every industrial facility in Iraq. Every industrial facility in Iraq had a camera in it, had teams coming in, and we could show without any doubt that there was no reconstitution of their weapons of mass destruction programs. There was no way in hell that Iraq had a single weapon of mass destruction when George Bush ordered the American military to cross the border for the purpose of punishing Saddam Hussein for failing to disarm. We knew he disarmed. We knew it. I knew it. Joe Biden knew it. I briefed Joe Biden. He didn't want to hear it. He knew the truth, and yet he convened a Senate hearing in the summer of 2002 to provide political cover for this war. Joe Biden's a lying sack of manure. They all are. Not a single one of them knows how to tell the truth.
So if they have an agenda, and they clearly are willing to manipulate the truth, the information in order to implement their agenda, they have to get the American people or just the public, the Western people, to agree to this. They have to get the public to go along with it. Let's talk now about Operation Mass Appeal. Tell us what this is.
Well, to set the story up, as I told you, we were ready to close the books on Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program in 1994, 1995. We knew that we had accounted for the vast majority of it, especially when the Iraqis came clean about their biological weapons program. That was the last thing. But we had this unaccounted for material still. And we had the problem of the concealment mechanism, the presidential guards, until the Iraqis told us the truth about that. I actually cracked that. Again, I don't want to bore you with the details, so some of the details are pretty cool. But by the summer of at the end of the summer of 1997, I was sitting down with the commander of the Special Republican Guard. Yep, come on, Mustafa. I was sitting down with his colonels, and I was interrogating them about what they did. The Iraqis finally admitted, because of the work that I and others did, that they had a concealment mechanism, that it had been involved in hiding weapons of mass destruction. They identified who they were, and then they showed us what they were doing today and that they had nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction today. It's something that had they done a couple years ago, we wouldn't have all this problem. But, they finally told the truth. As I'm leaving that night, a U.S. weapons inspector named Diane Seaman came in, and she had just done a no-notice inspection of a biological facility, and she caught two guys going out the back door, special security officers. That's Saddam Hussein's personal security. And they had documents on there. And in the documents, the loose Arabic translation, they went down and they had botulinum toxin. They had some controlled things that were there. And when they were asked about it, they refused to answer. Long story short, these were the guys who did the testing of Saddam Hussein's food and of his stool to make sure that he's not poisoned. And they were showing the different things they test for. There was nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction. But we had a loose Arabic translation. She came to me and said, "What do you do? What do you want to do?" And I said, "Let's confront them." So we had a meeting that night. I said, "You guys have to confess what this is." Then and they wouldn't talk about it because they're not allowed to talk about presidential security. They're just not allowed to. We wouldn't talk about our presidential security to foreigners. They can't talk about it. So I said, "Well, you want to do it the easy way? No, we're going to do it the hard way. I'm inspecting the special security headquarters tonight." And we took off down the road, and that's about the night that I almost died, because we got to one of those checkpoints that nobody goes across because the president's beyond there, and the gun came in and they were threatening to blow us all up and kill us, and that stopped that inspection. The Iraqis came in and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going here, blah, blah, blah." They had us this time, because this time the intelligence was bad. This was really about food inspection. There was nothing bad going on. This was a genuine misunderstanding. But because of the politics, it got blown out of proportion. We had an emergency meeting of the special commission. That's all the 100, the members that were appointed. The Security Council, the Russians were there. Lavrov was the ambassador at the time. He's there, the whole thing. And it's not looking good for us. They're starting to say that UNSCOM, especially Ritter, is a troublemaker. You're there just to make trouble. You never want this thing resolved, et cetera. So we have a huge PR problem. We are losing the PR battle around the world. Two things happened. First, the British came up to me and they said, I worked very closely with the MI6 station chief at the UN mission. Yes, they have a station chief at the UN mission. And we had been working together over a course of several years on intelligence issues. And he said, look, we have a program. We have an organization that does this kind of information operations. We're not asking you to lie, because I said, I don't lie. That's not going to do it. He said, but in your files, do you have intelligence that is non-actionable? To be actionable, it has to be something of enough specificity that I can build an inspection team, a known location on the ground within a certain time frame where I can accomplish certain tasks that fulfill an inspection objective that meets the mandate of the Security Council. I said, yeah, we got a whole bunch of that stuff, rumors, this, that, and the other thing. He said, could you give us like 5 of your best things that you can't inspect? Give it to us. And what we're going to do is we work it over, and then we get it published around the world in different newspapers in countries where we're trying to win over attention. I said, I don't get to make that call. So I went to Richard Butler, the Australian ambassador in charge, and I said, the British have approached me about this program, and they want to take some files and they want to turn them into news stories and then release them. And Butler went, yeah, we need to do that because we're losing the PR battle. And so I took the files, I gave it to the British. This was called Operation Mass Appeal, the code name given to this project of taking UN intelligence, turning it into news stories, planting it in the international media, was called Operation Mass Appeal. At the same time, the CIA approached us and said, we want to do a documentary with CNN. This is pretty cool because the CIA is working with CNN. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. I just told you that the CIA is working with CNN to do a documentary that's designed to shape the opinion of the American people. So the CIA goes to Charles Dulfer, the deputy executive chairman, who comes to me and he says, you're the intelligence dude. You're going to work with the CIA to release information to CNN so they can do this documentary. They're going to interview you guys. They're going to package it up, spying on Saddam, and they were going to put it out there. The inspector's story, I think they called it. And they released it in March of 1998. The Iraqis hated it because they accused us of cooperating with the CIA. We did. But these are two giant propaganda things. The thing about Mass Appeal is that this program didn't end. I continued to work with them on Mass Appeal up until June of 1998. Later, when I went to England on the eve of the war, trying to talk to the British Parliament, they wouldn't talk. They wouldn't admit. The Blair government wouldn't admit this. So I went public about Mass Appeal. And the curious thing is, first the Brits deny it. Doesn't exist, blah, blah, blah. I had too much detail, though. And they finally had to admit that, yes, Mass Appeal existed. But they, in typical lying fashion, said it didn't begin when Ritter said it began in November of 1997. No, it was just a one-time meeting in June of 1998. And it was only about this specific issue, and nothing happened from it. It's not a big deal. Again, they lie. That's all intelligence services do, is lie. They don't know how to tell the truth.
So the governments are, this is just like more proof that the governments are actually trying to propagandize people into believing certain things or going along with certain agendas, and agendas that are often not even, they're just agendas based on lies.
Yeah, Kim, it's worse than that. And when I came back from Iraq in 2002, after briefing the parliament, I was ambushed by CNN. They were trying to embarrass me, humiliate me on Crossfire. They're at that time one of their flagship talk shows, and they had brought me on. They had 2 guys who were ready to take me apart for being a shill for Saddam, etc. 5 minutes before I went on air, the news broke that Saddam was allowing weapons inspectors to return to Iraq because of yours truly, and suddenly they couldn't eviscerate me. I became not a hero, but they were like, okay, so now weapons inspector, go blah, blah, blah. And so I got invited to CNN headquarters in Atlanta. I guess they shut that down now, so things aren't going too well for CNN. But at that time, it was their big headquarters. And I was brought in by the CEO and the whole team. And I was put in a conference room with 60 people. Wolf Blitzer was there. All the big talking heads were there. And for an hour, they grilled me like I was a witness on the witness stand. They're grilling me about my experiences. And I brought documents because I knew that, they're like, well, do you have any proof? Right, here's the proof. That's the signature. This is that. And when I finished, the CEO stood up and said, hey, Scott, guys, Scott Ritter's passed the test. He's now, you guys know him as a credible source. Feel free to use him on any of your programs. And he said, Scotty, my boy. And he took me back there because now I'm his boy because apparently he loves me. And takes me into his war room. Now, this is early October of 2002. CNN is already working with the Pentagon to embed reporters. They have reporters being trained up to be embeds at wartime. This is October, before the official decision has been made by the president to go to war. He's still telling Congress that they're going to debate the war, that they may not do the war. The inspectors haven't returned to Iraq. CNN is working with the Pentagon to embed. They have all the war maps up there. And he's like, hey, you could be here working with us. You could help us build the war map. You can help us be this. You can help us be that. You can help us be that. And I was like, no, no, I can't. Because I went to Iraq to get weapons inspectors back in to stop this thing. But the collusion between CNN and the Pentagon, between CNN and the CIA, please listen to me when I tell you this. And I can say this about CNN. I can't say it, but I can assume that it's the same, for instance, with NBC News and others. They don't exist if the U.S. government doesn't want them to exist. They don't run a story unless the U.S. government feeds them the story. Whatever you get from CNN about Ukraine or about Israel doesn't come from a reporter, doesn't come from a newsroom. It comes from the CIA and from the Pentagon. It comes from the White House. CNN is a tool of the U.S. government. And CNN, if you're watching this, please sue me. I'd love to have the discovery on that one.
It's interesting you say that because I have been very suspicious with the let's kind of get into what's going on in Israel. I've been suspicious that the U.S. government and Netanyahu are not aligned and are not exactly aligned. I'm kind of getting the feeling that Netanyahu, he's an ideologue. He has his agenda that is to make Israel whole without a Palestinian land at all. He doesn't want a two-state solution. He wants all of the land for Israel, and he's been pretty explicit about that from the time since when he was young and threatening to assassinate Rabin and or threatening violence against Rabin, which ultimately ended up in his assassination. But the administration seems to not want this to escalate into a wider war. It seems like they're really worried about that, and it seems like Netanyahu doesn't care because his head is on the chopping block. He knows he's out when this war is over. He knows that his time is up, and so he's trying to accomplish as much as he can in that time. Do you get that sense as well? Because when you're saying that CNN and a lot of the news outlets are basically propaganda machines for the CIA, for the government, I'm noticing that this time around, they're doing more stories that are making people more shocked by Israel. I mean, it's not too much. It's not enough to turn the people 100% against Israel. But, you've got Wolf Blitzer asking, well, you knew there were civilians in there and you bombed it anyway. You've got Anderson Cooper sitting down with one of the nurses that just came out of Gaza, and she's telling the harrowing story of how horrible the conditions are for the Gazan people. So it's a little suspicious. It's kind of making it sound like there's an agenda, a U.S. agenda that's not aligned necessarily with Netanyahu's agenda. Do you get that sense as well, or am I completely off on that?
No, you're 100% accurate. Again, CNN, sue me. I need the discovery because I will subpoena all your phone logs, all the cell phones, and you will find connectivity between all of the talking heads and Jake Sullivan, all of the talking heads and Blinken's office, all the talking heads and people inside the White House.
Well, I mean, look, we know they do that with social media. I mean, we're getting the files, the Twitter files, we're getting the Facebook files. We know that the government has been colluding with social media in order to get their narrative out. That is proven now. So we can only assume that they've been doing that with establishment media this whole time as well. And we don't have the YouTube files yet. We don't have the CNN files, but you could imagine. Yeah, I mean, it's completely believable knowing the track record of what we do have the evidence for.
Yeah, and so CNN's job right now, their job has always been to massage for public consumption
Yeah.
the U.S. government position. So they receive the insight, they receive the scoops, they're given the talking points that they have to emphasize, and they sell these talking points over and over and over and over again. And what you see right now is a definite a divide between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government about what's going on in Gaza. Look, from the U.S. perspective, look what's happening here. We are a unilateral power who's now being challenged by a multipolarity reality. The
Hmm.
BRICS, G20, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the rules-based international order that we built our status, our place in the world around is starting to collapse. And so we are working, diplomatically with the global South, with the developing world, although they're pretty developed now, to try and keep them in our orbit. And we're not going to succeed. That's my assessment. But God bless them for trying. They're out there trying to do that. And so you're sitting there trying to get country X to listen to you and all that stuff, and suddenly Israel starts committing mass genocide in Gaza, and the capital city of that nation fills up with people shouting, yes to Palestine, no to Israel. And America's the number one supporter of Israel. And guess who's no longer, being welcomed into the club there? Who's being pushed out? America. So Blinken's looking at a world situation that's collapsing around him, and there's only one person to blame, Benjamin Netanyahu. He needs Netanyahu to stop doing what he's doing, but Netanyahu can't because, remember, Netanyahu was the prime minister who was at the helm when Israel had their worst day ever. He is responsible. He is to blame. And even before this happened, he was the leader of a nation that was almost at a civil war. The Israeli president said about a month before, he said, Israel's in danger of a real shooting civil war because of what Netanyahu's doing, this rewriting of basic law, the turning the judiciary into sort of a politicized wing of the legislative branch so that they can't prosecute Benjamin Netanyahu for corruption charges.
Right.
So that's what's going on. He was already a failed leader, already, on the verge of, he had to make this unholy alliance with the far right in Israel, these fanatic Zionists who want to kill every Muslim, who want a greater Israel. They've taken Benjamin Netanyahu's beliefs and they've turned them into something that even I think Adolf Hitler would get a little uncomfortable with. That might be an exaggeration, but
or very much in line, very much the same.
Look, when you speak of superhumans, and these extremists believe that the Jewish people are chosen by God to be, they are superhumans, and certain interpretations of the Talmud speak of Golems and Goyams and subhumans, and that's what we all are to them. I'm not saying all Jews are like that. Of course they're not.
No, it's just this far. It's this very, very extreme. I mean, Netanyahu is already far right and an ideologue wanting all of Israel. I mean, the Likud charter even basically says from river to the sea, it's all going to be Israel, and there's not going to be any Palestine.
And we're not allowed to say that.
Yeah, we're not right, but the Likud says it, and it's in their charter, and Netanyahu's been very proud of the fact that he was able to dismantle the Oslo Accords. He was able to basically make it, fund Hamas and keep the Palestinian people divided in order to prevent the rise of a Palestinian independent nation. He doesn't want that. But these people you're talking about, the people that allowed him to come back to power as a prime minister, and Israel's had a lot of governmental problems over the last few years, unable to form a government, election after election after election with no success. So they're in real turmoil. And he did. He had to align himself even with further right people than him, which is really something. And then declare we're going to annex the West Bank completely. Like it's going to be ours. Just going and annexing the Golan Heights, going in, just real extreme propositions, like you say, people that are very extreme and radical. Even more than him, which is a lot.
And the interesting thing is that the United States was running cover for them through the Abraham Accord.
Yeah.
It was negotiated by Trump, implemented by Trump, started by Trump. But the Abraham Accord, it gives lip service to the notion of a Palestinian state. But if you read it, what it really is a death sentence to the Palestinian state because there can be no Palestinian state there.
Right, with the way
and
it was.
It also, Yeah, it goes into the normalization of relations with the Gulf Arab nations. Israel is getting ready to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia, which would have been the crowning achievement of the Abraham Accord, the end of a Palestinian state. When the whole house came tumbling down on October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu is the man to blame there. He's desperate. He knows that if, for instance, he did the honorable thing and resigned today, that he would be held accountable for his corruption. He would spend the rest of his life in jail. He may be criminally liable for some of the things that happened on October 7th. We don't know until there's a commission report. So he's desperate. So his only recourse right now is extreme policies. And he's not looking for a war with Iran because he knows, that Israel can't win. They've done 2 exercises, Chariots of Fire last year, Firm Hand this year, where they stress tested the IDF, and they know they can't win a war against Iran. They can't win a war against Hezbollah. This is why America's deployed so much military force in as a deterrence against that. But America also knows that we can't win a war against Iran, that to beat Iran will require years, 900,000 troops, and even then it's not guaranteed. Nobody wants this war, but Netanyahu's playing a game where he's going to push the envelope as much as possible to keep America always reacting to keep Iran out of the fight, to force America to embrace Netanyahu as close as possible. So we're doing that, but at the same time, we're starting to play the propaganda game, and we're starting to get CNN and others to start to lose, because the idea here is to engender doubt amongst the American Jewish population. If you can get the American Jewish population to break with Netanyahu, then Netanyahu's days are finished. Right now, he's holding on because AIPAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, is telling him, we got the situation under control. How under control do they have it? We just got a new Speaker of the House. And, nice Republican MAGA guy from Louisiana, a good American boy. He's going to help America, make America great again. First order of business. Was it to help the homeless? Was it to reduce the deficit? Was it to, fund the U.S. military? Nope. We're going to send money to Israel. Bam, ladies and gentlemen, you just found out the whole thing. U.S. Congress is bought and paid for by the Israeli lobby, by Israel. Don't take my word for it. Ariel Sharon openly bragged about it when he was prime minister. Benjamin Netanyahu openly brags about it. They disrespect us so much that they buy our Congress, and then they brag about owning us, about owning it. And the proof is in the pudding. When the Speaker of the House, first order of business at a moment when America is suffering so much, to send more money to Israel, you know who's running the show.
Yeah. And AIPAC has been blatantly out there for Netanyahu. They don't want anybody but Netanyahu. They are pro-Netanyahu, and that's it. It's not even right now, it's not even just being pro-Israel, which they are, it's amazing. People hear AIPAC, but they don't realize that it's, like you said, American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Imagine if it was American China Public Affairs Committee. People would be losing their minds.
Register as a foreign agent.
Yeah, right. They would be losing their minds, saying you are working on behalf. You are a PAC, literally working on behalf of a foreign government, working on behalf of a foreign. This is not about Americans, and yet it's extremely, extremely powerful.
But Israel isn't a foreign government. Israel is an extension of America, according to so many people. Look, we allow this. We allow American Jews, when they turn 18, to go to Israel and enlist in the Israeli armed forces, the armed forces of a foreign country. Now, people say, well, come on, there's never going to be a problem between Israel and America. Let me take you to September 1982. American Marines were put on the ground outside of Beirut to provide a buffer so that the PLO could be evacuated after Israel invaded Lebanon, went up to Beirut, surrounded it. We were there. 3 Israeli tanks, British Centurion tanks, attempted to cross Marine lines to get where they weren't supposed to be. A Marine captain got on top of the tank, told him, you can't go here. The Israeli ignored him. He pulled out his pistol, put it to the Israeli officer's head, said, I'll blow your brains out if you move one step forward. If you don't think America is capable of confronting the Israelis, you don't know a damn thing about the complexity of American-Israeli relationships. I'm telling you right now that if you're an American working for the Israeli government as a member of the IDF, you've betrayed your country, because your loyalty is to this country. But see, now I'm anti-Semitic. Now the ADL will see has called me anti-Semitic because I dare question the loyalty of somebody who says, I want to wear the uniform of another nation, taking an oath to another nation, not an oath to the
Right.
Constitution, an oath to Israel, and understand that if push comes to shove and another American Marine jumps up on the tank and that guy is in the tank, he's going to have to shoot that Marine as an American.
Right. We had a member of Congress show up to Congress wearing an IDF uniform.
Should have been arrested on the spot.
Should have been
arrested on the spot.
Should have been completely. I mean, that should have been. That's should be considered.
Could you
treason.
imagine who's the representative from Michigan who's getting in trouble right now?
Rashida
the Palestinian.
Tlaib. Yeah,
Rashida. And I'm not a big fan of Rashida. I'm not, but I'm a huge free speech person, and free speech is free speech. And she didn't say anything. You can disagree with what she says, but what did Justice Brandeis say in the Supreme Court? The antidote to speech that you don't like is more free speech.
Right.
Meaning, if you don't like what they're saying, say something that opposes them. Instead, they censor her. But imagine if she showed up and she just said, I'm going to wear a green Hamas thing with Arab. I'm just going to show them, go, hey, I'm Hamas, baby. What do you guys think of that? She'd have been shot, first of all, coming in. They'd have shot her, literally shot her. They let a guy wear an IDF uniform as an American congressman in Congress. This is almost as bad as when Congress let 4 members of the Azov battalion come into Congress to address them. We let Nazis in. We let Zionists in. What the hell is going on with our neighborhood?
Yeah, it's really awful. It's really, really awful. Before we let you go, because we are running out of time, I do have to get your assessment on the what is going on with Russia, Ukraine. We now know, I mean, we're now getting reports that Americans are telling Ukraine it's time to look at a negotiation, work it out with Russia. Zelensky's getting really desperate. I feel really bad, actually, for Ukraine and Zelensky. I just think that they got led on by the United States, told, we're going to be with you forever. Don't worry. We got your back as long as you need. And of course, many of us knew that was not the case. And they were led down a bloody path, a murderous path, and ultimately are now being abandoned for a cooler, hipper war that the U.S. wants to get itself involved in. What do you think will Russia do with this, is my big question. Do you think that Russia will take advantage of this moment and say, all right, then, well, you know what, we're going to keep pushing and pushing all the way to Kiev, or take all of Ukraine, Poland too, while we're at it? Because that's what we were told. We were told that we have to stop Russia here, because otherwise they're going to expand and they're going to be taking all of it. What do you think Vladimir Putin and Russia will do with when Zelensky finally says, all right, I've got to now do a deal with you?
Well, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and his government will do what they've always said they're going to do: demilitarize Ukraine, denazify Ukraine, and ensure that Ukraine never joins NATO. That's the whole mission. There ain't nothing else. There's not another agenda. They don't want to invade Poland. They don't want to invade Romania. They don't want to invade Moldova. They don't want to invade Latvia, Lithuania. They don't want to do any of that. That's all fabricated bull from the European Union, from NATO, from the United States. All Russia wanted to do is what they always said they wanted to do. They don't want Ukraine to join NATO because that poses an existential threat to their national security. And we all know that it would have. Then the United States is incapable of telling the truth. I hope you guys understand that right now. There was never going to be a benign entry of Ukraine into NATO. It was always going to be used as a cancer to destroy Russia. Anybody who understands the complexity of Russian-Ukrainian history understands that if Ukraine is stripped out, it is a mortal blow to Russia. Russia could never allow that to happen. In 2008, William Burns, at that time the U.S. ambassador to Russia, today the CIA director, wrote a memorandum called Niet means Niet. No means no, meaning that if Russia says they will not allow Ukraine to join NATO, and if we continue to push, he said back then, that this will inevitably lead to Russian military intervention. And here's the kicker: Ukraine will probably lose the Donbass and Crimea. William Burns knew that in 2008.
Yeah. Right.
Knew that in 2008, and that's what's happening now. What Russia is going to do is win this war. That's what Russia. Now, remember, Russia's concept of victory is changed a little bit. Back in when they invaded, everybody's like, "Oh, it's an invasion! It's invasion!" All Russia wanted was Ukraine to go to the negotiating table.
Right.
That's all, and it succeeded. 6 days after they invaded, Ukraine was at the negotiating table. By the end of March, they had a peace treaty. The peace treaty, let me tell you the peace treaty that was initialed by Ukraine and Russia. what it called for is that Russia gets Crimea. I'm sorry, guys, you're never going to get Crimea back.
Right.
It's always been Russia. It will be Russia. But all the other territories that Russia had, and remember, they had more than what they had now. They were around Kiev. They were in Sumy, Chernihiv. They had captured a whole bunch. Russia said, we're giving it all back. We don't want it. We have no territorial aspirations at all. All we want is for you not to join NATO. That's it. Don't join NATO. And if you don't, we'll withdraw. They voluntarily withdrew from Kiev, from Sumy, Chernihiv. They pulled back. They were in the process of withdrawing from Kharkov. They withdrew about 50% of their forces back to Russia because they told the Ukrainians, we're going to withdraw. The Donbass would have remained independent, but would have been subjected to an international referendum to let the people of the Donbass decide where they want to go. Do they want to be independent? Do they want to join Russia? Do they want to stay in Ukraine? That was there. But Kherson, Zaporizhia would have been returned to Ukraine. Would have been returned to Ukraine. Ukraine was told by NATO not to accept the deal. So today, what Russia has done, because Ukraine continued this with the help of NATO, rebuilding their army 3 times, extending this war, Russia has said we can't trust the Russian population to Ukrainian governmental control anymore, the ethnic Russian population. So Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Lugansk are now part of the Russian Federation. And that will never change, ladies and gentlemen. That will never change. The Russian Constitution enshrines this territory as Russian territory. And if you try to take it away from them, they will use nuclear weapons to stop you. So any of this nonsense about empowering the Ukrainians to recapture their territory, it ain't their territory. Had they signed the peace treaty back in March of 2022, it'd be their territory today. No questions asked. Today it's not. But does Russia want other territories? No. That's all Russia wants. Russia said, you forced us to do this. We didn't want to do this. Now we've done it. It's not going to change. But if you continue to fight us, Kharkov will become ours. Dnipropetrovsk will become ours. Mykolaiv will become ours. Odessa will become ours. You'll lose another 20% of your country if you don't stop this war right now. So the best interest for Ukraine right now is to stop this war on Russia's terms. I love the hubris of the West. We're going to start talking to the Ukrainians about the conditions for peace. Don't talk to the Ukrainians. They're the defeated party. They lost the war. That's like people saying in September of 1945, we're going to start talking to the Japanese about the conditions of peace with the Americans. Tell those guys in the battleship Missouri, hold on for that surrender ceremony. Japan has a couple things they want to say about it. Nope, you lost. You sit down, you signed the thing. And it turned out to be a good deal. Why? Because America looked at it and said, for instance, we're not getting rid of the emperor. We're not getting rid of the emperor. It makes sense to keep the emperor. Imagine Russia saying to Ukraine, we're not going to do all the bad things you say. We're going to actually work with you to make you a viable country. Why? Because the notion of Ukrainian-Russian brotherhood is real.
Yeah.
It's real. These are Slavic brothers, man. Zelensky and the Western Ukrainians have ruined this, but it can be repaired. Russia wants to repair it. That's why they haven't destroyed the entire country. Ladies and gentlemen, look at Gaza. That's what happens to a city when you go to war.
Yeah.
Look at Kiev. That ain't a city at war because Russia's not at war with Ukraine. It's a special military operation for a reason. It has limited objectives. Now, if Ukraine wants to turn it into a war, then Russia can destroy Kiev like Israel's destroying Gaza. It's a very easy thing to do, but Russia isn't operating that way. Russia wants peace. Russia wants stability. Russia wants a new European security framework negotiated with NATO, with the West, that brings balance and stability to the region. That's all they want. All this other stuff that's put out there by threatening Poland is garbage. The only reason why Russia expanded their military from 900,000 to 1.5 million is because NATO invited 2 more members into it. And Poland asked 100,000 Americans to come be permanently stationed on Polish soil. Cause and effect relationship, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing happens in a vacuum. But the Russian forces that are being built are designed to defend Russia from the new NATO threat, not to launch offensive operations into Poland or anywhere else.
Well, I hope we wrap up that conflict quickly and soon. And then try, I would like to see us rebuild relations with Russia as well and try to, opening travel and trade. I'm sure travel will open back up. It's just, it's inevitable because there are Russians who live here, who have family there, and their people will want to go back and forth. And that's usually the first thing to kind of open back up. But the rest of it with the sanctions and the trade.
But you can travel to Russia right now. I just
Well, you
came
just
back
have
from
to go
Russia. I
through
was there in May.
Turkey. Yeah, but did you have to go to
Yeah. You go
Istanbul?
through Turkey. Yeah,
Right,
no direct flights into Moscow anymore. But
right,
I
right,
tell you this too: the Russians, they're the most welcoming, receiving people in the world. They want you to be there. They want to talk to you. Yeah, they're frustrated with our government. If you don't want to talk politics, they don't want to talk politics
right,
with you.
right,
They'd like to talk, shopping, Christmas, this, that, and the other thing.
right.
There's no reason for us to be turning our back. Like I said, I learned this lesson through the School of Hard Knocks back in on New Year's Eve in 1988 was when I was invited in the home of a Russian engineer who built intercontinental ballistic missiles targeted at American cities. And I met his family, I met his children, I met his neighbors, I broke bread in his house. And at that moment in time, I realized I don't want to kill these people, that these people deserve to live just as much as we do. The Russians are that way. Don't believe the Russophobia that's coming at you. Don't believe a damn thing coming out of CNN, MSNBC, NBC, CBS, or any American media outlet because it's all dictated to them by the United States government, which has been telling us
Yeah,
lies about Russia forever.
right. Well, Scott, this has been a great conversation. Really fascinating getting kind of the history of how you got to being a UN weapons inspector, and then much of us know about that time of your life, but didn't know what kind of led up to that. And it's really fascinating to find out, especially just the visceral like desire to kill the Soviets and how that is definitely ingrained. A lot of us we're seeing that now with Israel, right? There's like an ingrained on both sides. There's an ingrained hatred of we have to fight the other. The other is our enemy. The other is going to try to wipe us out. They're trying to kill us, so we have to kill them first, or we have to defend ourselves. And that's unfortunately human nature until we sit down with people and we talk to people and we realize that we're all the same. We have the same
Bingo.
goals, the same desires, which is to live in peace and to build our lives and to have prosperous families. Scott, thank you so much for being here. Really wonderful. Is there anything you want to tell? How can people find you, get a hold of you? Where can people get more of your opinions and work?
Well, it's a one-stop shop. ScottRitterExtra.com is the website. On there, I have a Substack. You can read what I write there. I don't charge anything. If you want to have a paid subscription, that's up to you. My wife will never reject the money. We can pay bills. But if you don't have the money, that's fine. Come in. It's a free subscription. All the podcasts that I do are linked there. When you send me a link to this one, I'll put it up there as well.
Right.
And so it's a one-stop shop for that. I'm in the process. Like I told you, I went to Russia for 26 days in May. Visited 12 cities. Was promoting my book, which was published in Russia. But in the process, got to meet the Russian people, have really serious discussions about them, about U.S.-Russian relations, and about the nature of the Russian soul. And I'm going to turn that experience into a documentary film called Waging Peace. And so, if anybody wants to assist in that, there's a link there, the wagingpeace.fund link. Any money you can give, whatever amount will help. We're well into the process of doing the film. Maverick is speaking out in support of the movie.
Sounds
and,
like.
And so, but like anything, nothing happens unless you can pay people. I'm not asking people to work for free. And if I'm going to hire a video editor, the video editor gets paid the going market rate. And so we need some help with that. But, so that's a project that we're doing. But that's it. ScottRitterExtra.com. One-stop shop.
Well, that link is down below. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, guys, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us. Really a great conversation with Scott. And that link to get more of his work and to help fund his upcoming documentary film, that link is all down below. We will be back again. Another great show for you. We, of course, are here every Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. If you have any questions, comments, you want to reach out, you can certainly do that, Kim at KimIverson.com. Otherwise, guys, we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us.